Hello and welcome to this new edition of the interview on France 24. My guest today is the former governor of Vermont. He was also the de facto chief of US Democrats during the last presidential campaign and a former presidential candidate himself. Howard Dean, we're pleased to welcome you on France 24 in partnership with the Terra Nova Foundation, a French liberal think tank.
Thank you very much for having me on.
During his trip in Europe, President Obama has seemed to raise as much enthusiasm here in Europe as he usually does in the US. As an American, how does it feel to see that the US is back in contact with the world?
It's great. America has a role to play in the world. It's going to be a different role now that we have a new president, and it'll be a role of partnership, and there won't be any junior partnership.
Among the requests by America to its allies, the US administration is asking Europe to take a greater role in securing a safer Afghanistan from terrorist cells. You were among the first to advocate the withdrawal of troops from Iraq to devote more energy to the fight against Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. Do you think that NATO should step up and commit more troops?
I do, but I think everybody has to understand this is a temporary request. The president has said something which I think is true, and I am delighted that he has said it. We are not going to win in Afghanistan militarily, but we do have to stabilize Afghanistan, not just because there are terrorists there who could strike at France or have already struck at Britain and Spain in addition to the United States, but because half of the people in Afghanistan are women. And if the Taliban were to come back to power in Afghanistan, there would not be one single United Nations convention supporting women that would be observed by this government. Women would be back in the 12th century, essentially as slaves. So there is a great moral imperative in Afghanistan going on beyond the terrorism of that the new government would support if they were to take over. So I think we have an obligation to support a democratic process in Afghanistan, but the ultimate solution will not be a military solution.
Speaking about Iraq now, are you growing increasingly impatient with a timetable of withdrawal from Iraq?
No, I think there's no point in having a big fight over 3 months. We want to leave Iraq, and we want to leave soon. And I think the president has kept his word, and so I'm very satisfied.
Now, about the G20 summit, which also ranked high on President Obama's agenda in Europe, it seemed that this summit was hailed as a major breakthrough, but the US failed to convince its allies to commit further economic stimulus. For someone like you, who actually left a mark as governor of Vermont by balancing the budget for the state, aren't you concerned by the massive amounts of taxpayers' money that's being spent to bail out banks and car makers? And the list goes on.
Well, the way it's being spent is I'm not concerned about. Most of the stimulus package went actually to stimulate things like renewable energy and education. There is some money going into the banks, but it's in partnership with the private sector. And I believe ultimately, if we do the right thing, the taxpayers will end up making money out of this. The problem with the banks is not that these assets are not worth anything, it's that they're not worth anything today. They will be worth something as these mortgages get paid off and so forth. So I'm not concerned about it. I think you have to do it. I am a fiscally conservative. I am worried about the budget. But this is an emergency for the world financial system. Something has to be done about it. I think even the more conservative people in France and Britain and Germany and the United States realize that this is not the time to worry about balancing the budget. This is the time to fix the economy.
You come from the northeastern part of the United States. Are you concerned about the situation for U.S. car makers? Do you think there's a chance they can escape bankruptcy?
The most important thing is that they remain functional as car makers. It is possible that one or both of the 2 out of 3 companies would go through a bankruptcy. That would be very bad for the people who work for those companies. We'd like to avoid that if it's possible. But I believe the car companies will continue in one way or another, and if they have to continue in bankruptcy, at least they'll continue and we'll have automobile jobs in the United States.
In the meantime, unemployment continues to rise in the US. The crisis has already claimed over 5 million jobs. 5 million, that's exactly the number of jobs the US administration is committed to creating by tackling environmental changes. Do you see that green revolution happening in the US?
It is, and it's been led by Europe. We sort of have the lost decade in America with President Bush, where there was no greening. but there is now, and Europe has led the way. We hope to start to try to catch up. The president, in his stimulus package, put an enormous amount of money into green energy, but clearly Europe is in the lead on this and will remain so for a while, which is a good thing. Somebody has to lead, and Europe is doing that.
Now, for so many years, it seemed that it was almost impossible to convince business lobbies to agree on painful concessions for environmental changes. What makes you think that it will be easier from now on to convince them in the US?
Well, I think it may not be easier to convince them, but fortunately we have the votes. We have the votes in the Senate and the House, and the President has Democrats have the White House, and the Democrats are clearly a much more green party than the Republicans are. I think also the progressive businesses realize that the future is in green energy and energy independence. And again, perhaps one of the reasons that that Europe has led the way here is you have the threat of the Russians turning off your gas every winter, and that concentrates the mind on making sure that you have independence in energy. So you've made a great many more advances than we have, but I think we are getting the picture that we have to be independent in our energy.
Do you feel a sense of urgency among business leaders?
There is a sense of urgency among the progressive business leaders. Obviously, there are always some that drag their feet and hope that this will go away, but among progressive business leaders of major American corporations, they realize that we have to use much more renewable energy.
Now, to those who are familiar with US politics, it appears that you inspired Obama's victorious campaign in the way of building a grassroots party, an organization that you pioneered as a presidential candidate and then DNC chairman. Do you consider yourself the trailblazer of Obama's victory?
I actually don't believe in the so-called great man theory of history. I think what happens is the real trailblazers are out in the community. What we did was not invent all the things that Obama subsequently perfected. We found things that ordinary people were doing to empower themselves using the internet, and we centralized them, brought them into the campaign, and then used them for the whole country. So we didn't invent all this stuff. Ordinary people invented all these things, very smart people using the internet. They empowered themselves, and then in our campaign we gave them the means as a country to empower themselves, and that's what was the Obama people built on.
Now, despite your role on top of the Democratic Party during the campaign, you were not selected as for the health secretary position, for which you had expressed an interest in, and it's worth reminding that you're actually a doctor turned politician. Do you feel entitled to a larger role in this administration?
No, I don't feel entitled to anything. I did what I did because I wanted change in our country. I didn't even do what I did because I'm a Democrat. I just realized that you would not have any progressive change in America with a Republican president, and now we're having progressive change in America. So, the question of who is in the administration and who is out is great for television and gossip and politics, but it doesn't make a difference in terms of the policy. The policy will be good anyway.
Let's just imagine for a few minutes that you had been appointed. The healthcare reform has stopped the agenda of all presidential candidates for the past 20 years or so. And yet the prescription medicine is more expensive in the US than probably anywhere else in Europe, not to mention emergency rate. How would you make sure that it is possible for most American households to access affordable healthcare coverage?
Well, I think we're going to have to do one of two things. We're going to either have to lift the restrictions in other countries so we can have an open competition, or we're going to have to regulate in the United States. But the American consumers now are paying for most of the research and development around the world, and that's not fair. Everybody should be paying for that.
Now, do you think this is by revamping the private health insurance, by, as you said, probably spurring more competition, or by the public sector and doing the necessary reforms there to ensure universal healthcare coverage?
Well, private health insurance doesn't spur competition. It makes prices go up. Private insurers are much less efficient than the government. Most Americans believe that the private sector is more effective. It is, but not in healthcare. We need the president has proposed a system where we can choose between a government healthcare program or a private healthcare program. That's what they need to choose. That's what the Congress needs to pass. If they won't pass it, if they won't give us the choice of a public healthcare plan, then they shouldn't pass anything. Because spending $600 billion on the system we already have is a terrible mistake, and it's a waste of money. We should have a public option so that American people can choose public insurance if they want it.
Does it mean raising taxes, or will you ask more money from companies?
We will ask money from companies if their employers are no longer insured by them. In other words, if they're paying a certain amount now, we'd like them to continue to pay the certain amount. But you can buy insurance from the government more cheaply than you can buy private insurance, so ultimately this will save money.
But we have the example of a company such as General Motors, who's been completely dragged down by the huge debt for health coverage for its retirees, not only retirees, but also existing employees. So how do you think you can cope with these problems?
Well, I think that's one of the things that the American people have not understood about the healthcare problem. It's not just a matter of covering the people with no insurance. We're at a big competitive disadvantage with our European and Canadian competitors because American companies have to pay this cost that goes up 3 times the rate of inflation, and your government, in most cases, takes care of that cost. So actually, the General Motors is one of the big beneficiaries of the President's health care reform because their retirees would then get government health care reform, instead of health care that it's bankrupting General Motors.
When you were governor of Vermont, you managed actually to cut teen pregnancy by half. How do you feel now to see that the Obama administration is back investing more in birth control programs, for instance, and also stem cell research?
You have to do those things. One of the hallmarks of the Bush administration was that science doesn't matter, that facts don't count. Well, you can't run anything. It doesn't matter if you're a conservative or a liberal. If you don't care what the facts are, then you can't make anything work, which is, of course, what happened in the United States in the last 8 years. So I'm delighted that we have a president who believes that science actually should be paid attention to, because facts are facts. There's no liberal facts, and there's no conservative facts, and there's no socialist facts. Facts are facts, and you have to deal with them because they're real. And now we have a president who understands that if you allow teen pregnancy to go up because you don't teach anybody about birth control, that's going to be very expensive down the line and very tough on families. So I think we're back on the right track.
Well, thank you very much, Howard Dean, for being our guest today on France 24.
It's my great pleasure. Merci beaucoup.
And thank you for watching. Please do stay with us on France 24.